Greetings and good evening to colleagues and friends. We've just a couple of people coming in to the room. I'm trying to delay as long as I can. My name is Kenneth Clark. I'm the Director of the Centre for Medieval Studies here at York, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here in person and to colleagues and friends online who are joining us for the lecture. Our speaker this evening will be introduced by my colleague, Dr. Shazia Jagat, so I'm not going to steal any of that thunder, but I just wanted to let you know that after this evening's lecture, we will be gathering in the atrium of the Berwick Saul building, which is right here beside us. We do exit the building and go to the building next door for a drinks reception, and you are all warmly invited to that. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Shazia. Thank you.
Hello and welcome again, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Glaire Anderson to this York Medieval Lecture. Dr. Anderson is a senior lecturer in Islamic Art at the University of Edinburgh, and she's a specialist of Islamic art and history, from the Caliphal periods from around 650 to 1250, so from the emergence of Islam to the downfall of the Abbasid Caliphate. She earned her PhD from MIT in 2005 in the History, Theology and Criticism of Architecture and the Aga Khan Programme for Islamic Architecture. Her research interests focus on Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain, and Umayyad Cordoba in particular. She was interested in elite court culture and architectural villas, which was subject of her first book, published in 2013, The Islamic Villa in Early Medieval Iberia, Architecture and Court Culture in Umayyad Cordoba. She's also interested in court women as makers of medieval Islamic art, medieval global connections between Islamic and non-Islamic societies. So she's currently a team member on a really exciting project at the University of Edinburgh called A Viking in the Sun, focused on Harald Hardrada and the Mediterranean and Nordic world. She's also interested in medieval science and visual culture, which you can see from the lovely image of an astrolabe just there, which is also the subject of her second book, which was recently published in 2024 by Oxford University Press, A Bridge to the Sky, Science and Arts in the Age of Abbas ibn Firnas. Alongside all of this, and her most recent work, which we'll be hearing about in a moment, is her work on diversifying gaming and digital art history, and she's working as a public-facing historian. In 2021, she founded the Digital Lab for Islamic Visual Culture and Collections to explore new technologies to create immersive experiences of medieval Islamic spaces and objects. She's been working as a consultant with Ubisoft, the video games manufacturer, working on Assassin's Creed Mirage, an experience that she discusses in a recent co-authored publication, The 200 Million Student Classroom, Teaching Islamic History One Video Game at a Time, which was published in the International Journal of Middle East Studies, and a forthcoming essay on video games and medieval work in the International Journal of Islamic Architecture. She's also teaching, on top of all of that, a distance learning course for Edinburgh Futures Institute new MSc in Cultural Heritage Futures on video games and XR for inclusive cultural heritages. Without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Anderson to tell us about all the work she's been doing.
Thank you so much to Dr. Shazia Jagat and to Dr. Richard McClary for the kind invitation, and Shazia for that very kind introduction, and to Professor Kenneth Clark for such a warm welcome back to York. I'm delighted to share my work with you. And it's really a pleasure to see wonderful colleagues that I haven't seen in years, and has been a pleasure to learn more about the work that's happening across the York medieval and pre-modern studies communities. So video games are by now well recognized as a powerful educational tool, one of the most significant ways in which the public engages with the past. Scholars recognize the educational value of games in making knowledge accessible and informing public perceptions of the past. In the 2016 essay, Revisioning the Global Middle Ages, for example, published by Lynn Ramey and an interdisciplinary group of medievalists, learning technologists, and games industry professionals, Ramey rightly argued that when harnessed effectively, video games can increase empathy and learning, and due to their performative and visual affordances, can make medieval communicative and representational strategies more accessible to contemporary audiences. In 2022, Luka Ivan Jukic observed in an essay published in The Atlantic that people of all ages are learning history from video games, so something that academics had long established. And in my opinion, for this reason alone, the medium merits the same level of critical attention that we as academics give to other forms of popular visual culture, namely film, television, and other screen-based entertainment. Yet, as Islamic historian Edmund Hayes has pointed out in the case of the video game Crusader Kings, while such games are fun to play, their historical content is often outdated and even sometimes perpetuates problematic stereotypes and misinformation. And so one of the things that I have been thinking about over these last 5 years or so is that all the excellent research that has been going on in academic settings for many, many decades hasn't yet always been successfully absorbed into these popular history-themed games. And this is certainly true when it comes to the visualization of the past in the form of game environments and imagery. And as an art historian and architectural historian, that's what I tend to really look at and focus on. So I argued in 2020, and I still argue today, that the low profile of Islamic sites and objects in this digital landscape of games, and more broadly in digital cultural heritage, problematically reflects persistent hierarchies of knowledge production, despite the Academy's long-standing efforts to critique legacies of colonialism and empire and calls from scholars such as Ramey to harness the power of games to visualize a global Middle Ages. This situation risks perpetuating these problematic hierarchies for global audiences, implying that the monuments, landscapes, objects, and histories of medieval Islamic societies are not significant on a global scale. At stake is the relationship between decolonization and knowledge as these are deployed and consumed digitally, including in the form of medieval history-inspired video games. So given that Muslims make up around 2 billion people around the world, being aware of these issues and how to avoid the problems around accurate or authentic cultural representation is particularly important, I think, when you consider that nearly 70% of global players are in regions with majority Muslim populations or that have been historically significant to the history of global Islamic civilization. Not only in the Middle East, it's important to remember, but also Asia Pacific, where Indonesia, for example, the country with the largest Muslim population in the world today, is located. And that's leaving aside Muslims and Muslim heritage players who comprise the remaining 30% of players in Europe and the Americas. So with these contexts in mind, in my talk today, I want to discuss how my recent experiences as a video games industry consultant and as an academic researcher, developer, and more recently, social entrepreneur, engage with the aforementioned ongoing discussions and debates about historical and cultural representations in games, and actually the role of the academic in these debates. Because I'm going to be talking about issues of cultural representation, I also want to say that my own background as a Filipino-born, biracial, first-generation immigrant to the United States, definitely informs my perspectives on the representation of Muslims, women, and minoritized communities. So the region of the Philippines in which I was born was historically Muslim prior to the early modern Spanish colonization of the Philippines. However, in speaking about my work on Islamic civilization and on the Middle East, I want to be very clear that I'm not speaking from any lived experience myself as a Muslim, right? I'm speaking as a researcher who has been trained in the history of Islamic architecture, Islamic visual culture. So having earned my doctorate in the Aga Khan program at MIT, I've taught the art, architecture, archaeology, and history of Islamic civilization with a focus on Islamic Iberia and the Caliphal period for the last 20-odd years. My books and edited volumes, which I'm showing you here, and the majority of my publications do focus on Cordoba, the capital of medieval Islamic Iberia, always within the context of the broader Islamic lands in the age of the great caliphs, and with a focus on the 9th through the 11th centuries. But what perhaps makes me a little different from most of my other colleagues with similar academic expertise is that I do have a long-standing research trajectory that uses game development tools and game development processes. And so I wanted to, Pardon me, I'm moving between two computers, so I knew I would confuse myself. But I've used game engines in my academic research since 2010 or so, when I began experimenting with game engines for creative historical visualization. Specifically, and this is the project in 2011 that you see here, specifically of a 10th century Cordoban villa and its landscape and some objects that were associated with the patron of the villa. In 2021, I founded the Digital Lab for Islamic Visual Culture and Collections at Edinburgh to bring together my work across art history, museum collections, and really return to that previous experimentation with game development engines and other immersive digital technologies for the practice of art history. Simultaneously, I returned to games as an Islamic historian advising the development team for an analog game. So that is the Viking in the Sun Lion Rampant game that you see here, which was an expansion of a popular tabletop game, a franchise, Lion Rampant. And that was for the History and Games Lab, also at the University of Edinburgh. And as Shazia mentioned, that is an ongoing public impact collaboration focused on the medieval Mediterranean experiences of Harold Hardrada, who of course died near York in the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So I developed the Digital Munya 2, which is the next game that you see here, and the Cordoba Journey game there, while I was also consulting and collaborating with Ubisoft on Assassin's Creed Mirage and its History of Baghdad Codex. So I also want to say that History of Baghdad Codex feature, which is the educational feature of Mirage, is now available freely for players ages 12 and up as the Discovery Tour Medieval Baghdad mobile app and web app, so hopefully quite accessible to wide audiences. The Digital Munya 2 IP and the assets were the point of departure for the Cordoba Journey game, and they also served as the departure point for a follow-on collaboration, Digital Munya 3, which is a collaboration that I had after Assassin's Creed Mirage with the longtime franchise historian for Assassin's Creed, who is also the world design director at Ubisoft. So my work in video games continues, both from the academic research side, doing proof of concept academic games, but also still consulting as well. And so I look forward to saying more about that work when slightly later in the talk. So I want to share the collaborative approach between myself, my digital lab team, which at the time were post-grad students, now they've graduated, and with Ubisoft, so working on Assassin's Creed Mirage and its educational feature, the History of Baghdad Codex. And what I'd like to show and share with you is how I approached this work, keeping in mind issues of medieval art, medieval history, cultural representation, and social impact. And for those reasons, I hope this case study could be useful to provide an example of the kind of support that I believe we as academics and as medievalists can offer to the games and entertainment industry to tackle some of the challenges that developers face when making games with culturally diverse historical themes and as a means of positive social impact. So the catalyst for my collaboration with Ubisoft comes from not only my research engagement with games and game development tools, but it also has a personal side as well, thanks to my son and thanks to to my identity as a parent. So seeing how Assassin's Creed sparked my son's interest and engagement with history over many years, really over more than the last decade or so, was a major inspiration for me founding the Digital Lab and returning to my games engine research. And having gotten back into playing games during the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020-21, starting at my son's urging with Assassin's Creed Origins, and then Odyssey and Valhalla, that's when I came across Ubisoft's related Discovery Tour educational games. And seeing the way that those Discovery Tour educational games engaged with museum collections, engaged with academics and academic research, that's what inspired me then to contact the world design director at Ubisoft directly. I wanted to offer support, if needed, for the connections that I could see they were making to Islamic societies in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So the character Basim in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, a non-player character, an NPC, was supposed to be from the Abbasid court at Baghdad. So this was one of the connections I could see that were being made to the medieval Islamic world in Valhalla. And I knew that I could help them with the visual evidence for these connections, and I also wanted to let them know that I could offer support more broadly if they were going to do more with that connection to Muslims and Islamic civilization. And this is because, as Shazia was saying, those intercultural connections between medieval Islamic societies and other polities, including Viking Age Britain and Scandinavia, is something that I've had a long-standing research interest in. So my reaching out then led to email exchanges and meetings, and subsequently an invitation to discuss a new project, which later turned out to be Assassin's Creed Mirage. So with that in mind, I also want to introduce my Digital Lab team and what they brought to our collaborative work on Assassin's Creed Mirage. So Sarah Slingluff, who you see in the middle there, served as our lead on educational content for wide audiences. So before she came to do her PhD with me at Edinburgh, Sarah was a high school teacher with 10 years of experience in the classroom and 2 graduate degrees in global history and Middle East studies. And so her research in the classroom, but also using classical Arabic sources and her research in Islamic archaeology, history, and law actually were extremely important to the collaboration. Likewise, Denise Vural served as a lead researcher for me on our museum collections, and she brought her training in history, art history, and digital media, as well as Islamic art to our collaboration. Moreover, Denise is from Istanbul, so she also brought some personal perspectives on issues of Muslims and representation from her own experiences growing up in Turkey. And all three of us, as women on the team, brought our lived experiences and also our academic research and interests on women, specifically in medieval Islamic societies. And finally, Dara Etefagi served as our digital lab developer, and he brought to the team his experiences combining music composition, game design, audio-visual art, and immersive digital technologies. Likewise, Dara is also from Yazd in Iran, and has lived and traveled widely in the Middle East as well as Europe. So he brought all of those lived experiences as well, and those perspectives on Muslims and representation to the team. And I felt that this was an important way that we as academics could also support the development team, bringing not only our academic background and expertise and training, but also some aspects of lived experience that would be important for representation. On the Ubisoft side, our main collaborators were Maxime Durand, the world design director and longtime historian for the Assassin's Creed franchise, and Dr. Raphael Wayland, who was the in-house historian for Mirage. Wayland is an expert in Middle Eastern and public-facing history, and his work involved finding culturally and historically authentic elements to include in the game, and reviewing aspects of it for coherence with the setting, and he led the selection and writing of the History of Baghdad educational codex entries and the selection of some of its images from the suggestions that me and my team brought to them. So our collaboration on Assassin's Creed Mirage, and specifically then as well on the Codex, began with a series of weekly custom training workshops over the course of 9 weeks, during which we had many discussions with the development teams to understand what their needs were and to try to better understand their perspectives and what we as academics could offer to support those. In this session, for instance, we were presenting to and discussing with the creative director, one of the narrative designers, and a member of the diversity and inclusion team. And so each week we would answer questions that were brought by the Ubisoft teams, and we supplied quite detailed historical information that would have been very difficult and extremely time-consuming for them to find without the help of academic experts. I want to say a word about our approach because in the class discussion that I had with some of you just before this, we talked a lot about historical accuracy versus authenticity, and so this is the approach that I use as a historian of art and architecture, but which we also brought to this project. So this guides how we approached training the development teams at Ubisoft, and it's really the same way that I approach my work as an art historian, which is to be, to strive for authenticity through being very specific about chronology, being very specific about geography, so place-specific, time-specific, but also thinking and approaching topics in a way that really foregrounds questions of inclusion, foregrounds equity, diversity, and inclusion, and through a kind of post-colonial lens and an interest in decolonization work. So basically, when I say we approach our framework to support authenticity, what I'm talking about is an academically rigorous and post-colonial studies informed approach that also aligns with industry guidance on historical research in game development. And specifically, I'm showing you the guidance from the International Game Developers Association white paper on inclusive game design and development, which was published in 2022. So just to give you an example of what this kind of guidance says, this guidance includes the following statement, quote, "When referring to or creating a game about a specific historical event or time period, note that historical records are often biased or limited. Thus, multiple sources should be referenced. Any topic should be approached with consideration that often only the victors and powerful were the recorders of history, leaving out many diverse characters and perspectives." So this is guidance coming from the industry that I think, as an academic, feels quite comfortable. And for example, because of our combined expertise and research interests, for instance, in medieval Islamic women's histories, Denise and Sarah and I on the team were particularly sensitive to, or tried to be particularly sensitive to, things like issues of gender representation. And we really tried to advise our collaborators who, on the whole, were predominantly men, right, around these issues of gender and gender representation. And it was particularly in the historical information presented in the Codex feature that we, were able to support the development team with accurate sources of historical inspiration and rationales for things like female characters, and also quests that introduce players, for example, to women of different social and legal classes, free and unfree, elite and non-elite, which is a topic that has been very important as a strand in my own academic research. So I'd like to show you the History of Baghdad educational feature that was the focus of the collaboration part of our work with the Ubisoft historians. So we started off as a consultancy, and then the collaboration switched into a research collaboration properly. So this is the focus of our collaboration with the Ubisoft historians, and which is where the academic knowledge and the historical context comes into the game overall. So the Codex is where you actually find the accurate, hopefully as much as possible, the accurate content that was written, reviewed, revised by historians. So it is part of the in-game codex that also includes, as you can see, tutorials on how to play the game, a database with game lore, but the History of Baghdad is where the actual historical content is. So I'll see if I can play this. So you find these markers in the game environment, and when you interact with them, they will pull up a Codex entry on one of the scientific or one of the topics that you saw in the menu, and then there's an entry on that which is illustrated by a museum manuscript or a museum object, as you can see here in the context of a manuscript copy of an important scientific treatise. And something that was very important for me and for all of us, I think, was to make sure that the gamers would have the actual information about those artifacts that we were using to illustrate the Codex entries, so that if they wanted to find out more about those, they had the object information, they had the accession number, they had the collection information, and so forth. So I'm really pleased that they incorporated that information into the game. So hopefully this brief example of the gameplay and how that Codex feature works in it will make clear to you something that I think is very significant about Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is that that historical information is integrated into the game world, and it's tied to player progression rather than being separated out as a kind of side feature where you'll find the actual historical information. So that, I think, is something really significant that Ubisoft did in making this particular Assassin's Creed. All right, so what were some of the other benefits of the collaboration? I want to talk about this for just a moment as well. The benefits, I think, for the development teams, as I said, included faster development processes because we were able to provide them with detailed, accurate information that it would have been very difficult, very costly, very time-consuming to find if they hadn't been working with academics. And the themes that make up the Codex also arose out of that 9 weeks of training that my team and I provided. And the themes arose out of those trainings, but were chosen by the world design director. And then Raphael Wayland, the historian, then wrote an explanatory text for each of the entries, which my team and I reviewed, revised, edited, sometimes co-wrote, sometimes heavily revised when we thought there were issues of particular sensitivity. So it was very much an iterative and collaborative process, which I think was a benefit for both of us, actually, for both sides. My team and I also suggested objects from museum collections that could illustrate each entry, as I said, and co-created in collaboration with Durand, Wayland, and the Ubisoft teams what I think really functions as an online museum exhibition on the art, culture, and history of the Caliphal era, with a focus on the Abbasids, of course, given the narrative of the game. I was also able, importantly, I think, to draw on my academic networks and knowledge of museum collections, for instance, to introduce the developers to important institutions and cultural partners that could fit with the needs of the development teams. So to give one example, the Khalili collections, whose 9th century North African astrolabe features in the Codex that you see here. Because I had worked with the Khalili collections Wikimedian in residence, Martin Poulter, as part of my kind of social justice work to diversify Wikipedia content at Edinburgh, where we also have a wonderful Wikimedian in residence, I knew as an organization that that the Khalili collections are interested in democratizing access to art collections digitally, and so that that they would be potentially a good fit for this project. So one of the things that was extremely important to me was making these connections between, between the academy, between cultural institutions, GLAM institutions, and so forth, so that we could really make the Codex a place where players could truly learn more about the objects and histories, and to further hopefully the curiosity that playing the game and seeing these Codex entries might foster. We were also obviously able to provide inspiration for more authentic game environments. So in creating the Assassin's Creed Mirage game world, Ubisoft's world design teams faced an extreme challenge in visualizing the game's built environment because, as you probably know, this is due to the lack of surviving tangible remains from 9th century Baghdad and from the round city of Baghdad in particular, which is so central to the game's narrative. So this is the image, that I always use when I'm teaching art in the age of the caliphs. The image that my colleagues probably often use as well to teach about Abbasid Baghdad, the round city, what it was like in the 9th century. But obviously, as you can see, this is very, very limited in what it can convey about the urban environment or tangible cultural heritage, monuments, and so forth, and certainly daily life in a medieval Islamic city. And since the Assassin's Creed franchise is so well known for the time and the attention that they spend to creating historical, authentic, representations of architecture and urban environments, representing 9th century Baghdad was, to put it mildly, a very, very steep order. But I thought, and I still think, that it was an extremely important and laudable project in terms of educating wide public audiences about medieval Islamic art, architecture, and history, including cultural heritage that we have lost. And so this is where I, as a historian of medieval Islamic architecture of the period, was brought in to help those creative teams better understand the broader Islamic architectural tradition, urban traditions of the caliphal time period. And that means when they created their historical visualization, this is what they ultimately created for the game. Taking inspiration from the 9 weeks of training in caliphal art and architecture that we had. Now, as I noted in an interview with Apollo magazine, when asked what I thought about the game environment that Ubisoft created, I have 2 different reactions depending on what hat I'm wearing at the time, really. When I look at the game trailer, particularly aerial views like this one, the individual architectural elements that I can see are a bit jarring, right? Because I can see that many of them are not authentic to the caliphal period. And in fact, they're actually references to Islamic architecture, sometimes from far outside the moment in the 9th century that the game's narrative is supposedly set in. As a historian, of course, I find that jarring, even though what they've done I also find quite visually spectacular. So I would have conceptualized Baghdad in a way that's much closer, perhaps, to the archaeological evidence that we have for 9th century Iraq, specifically in a site like Samarra. But at the same time, I think what they've done has a significance that actually goes beyond that. This is a video game that's going to bring an unfamiliar artistic tradition and global history to literally millions of players around the world. And so when I think about kind of my public impact hat, with that hat on, then I think what they've created is actually important in the way we can look at it as a visual homage to an entire expanse of Islamic art and architecture. So if I don't look at it from just a strictly academic historian of, say, the 9th and 10th century or the caliphal period, then I think it's very exciting and very commendable. I think, too, one of the benefits of working collaboratively together like this is that potentially it was a more creative process for the development team because it was rooted in and based on specific sources of inspiration. And so just to give you one of my favorite examples, thanks to a colleague at the British Museum who is a specialist in Iraq, medieval Iraq, I was able to connect the development teams to another organization that could support their interest in working with communities and public-facing work. In this case, the cultural heritage group, the Safina Projects, who study and preserve Iraq's boats and maritime heritage. And their work on those Iraqi watercraft inspired the Ubisoft artists who were able to create aspects of the game environment that reinterpret these traditional Iraqi round boats that you see there, or guffa. So adding a recognizably local, authentic detail to the game environment. And now this is a detail in the game environment that if you're not from Iraq or you're not familiar with these particular Iraqi watercraft, you might not ever notice this detail, right? But if you are from Iraq and you know this tradition and you know this very recognizable local cultural heritage element, that detail could mean a lot in terms especially of amplifying this feeling of an authentic representation. But turning to the public social impact value of this work, which I think for me is really the important aspect of it, I want to share some of the reception that the game has received in the international media. Especially, I was happy to see the positive reception praising the development team's world building and the historical research that informed it. So that was quite good to see. I hope that will encourage other developers to likewise work with academics in their world building. So, you know, as an academic historian, I also want to say that I found these two representative quotes to be very moving, just on a personal level, and to underscore the positive social impact just at the level of the individual that this kind of work can result in. So they came from North American players of Middle Eastern heritage, but who, you know, have grown up in the United States as Americans, but for whom the game was a success because it has added meaning and significance for them from a personal history perspective. And in particular, this quote here, it's nice to see my people and culture be a bit more than target practice for first-person shooter games. I just found that extremely, extremely moving as I'm thinking about issues of representation. But likewise, public-facing initiatives like the museum exhibitions, so this one, for instance, held at the Arab World Institute in Paris, continuing at present in other venues in France, also, I think, led to high public engagement with this history. So hopefully, the public benefits from new experiences that center, in this case, histories and visual cultures, material cultures that are still unfamiliar to many in a kind of Anglo-European context. So subsequently, I had a quite amazing experience, actually, of being able to speak about this collaboration and the value of this work at what might be the world's largest game developers conference, GDC, in San Francisco last year. So as an academic historian speaking to an audience of game developers, that experience confirmed, in my mind, the importance of doing this kind of public-facing social impact work in collaboration with industry. I learned so much from listening to Muslim game developers and others who identify with minoritized communities of various kinds in the discussion sessions that followed my talk. And I also learned from attending the Muslims in Games Roundtable, for instance, which was sponsored by the International Game Developers Association, and really just listening to the concerns and the needs that from the development side, colleagues in the games industry are talking about and thinking about. As I listened to the experiences shared by the participants in these sessions, I was very, very struck in 2024 by the fact that Muslim participants have enough to contend with in terms of simply existing in our polarized societies as members of minoritized communities, simultaneously juggling the demands of their jobs amidst so many ongoing traumas: war, immigration, massive layoffs in the industry, challenges to equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, to name just a few of the things that they were speaking about, and the additional burdens and expectations that places on them in their role as industry professionals. So what I heard at GDC, relevant to cultural representation and game development, and the conversations that I've continued to have over the last year with industry professionals, many of whom I met at GDC, including those who identify with minoritized communities, confirms the hunch that I had going into that experience, that developers creating worlds inspired by history and inspired by medieval history need specific support from experts trained in history of art, history of architecture, landscape, material culture, archaeology, all of those being fundamental sources of inspiration for creating rich, authentic game worlds, whether those worlds are meant to depict history or fantasy or something in between. And this is where I believe that social entrepreneurship has a crucial role to play for academics who are willing and interested to try working with the games and entertainment sector. Because as my historical consulting experience with Ubisoft has shown me, and subsequently consulting for other game studios as well, issues around accurate portrayals of the past, especially the medieval past, and around authentic and respectful cultural representation can be more effectively addressed by ensuring access to historical expertise that game development teams need to create nuanced, complex, intellectually and artistically satisfying game worlds. So in conclusion, the work that I've shared with you today offers just one case study of how I believe academics can engage wide public audiences through games and entertainment, create positive social impact, and actively take part in shaping the representation of medieval history for wide public audiences. Working collaboratively across academic and development teams is incredibly challenging. I won't lie. It's very challenging, at times uncomfortable. And it requires a willingness to compromise that often does not sit comfortably with our academic training as historians. But I am convinced it is necessary. I'm convinced that with empathy and a willingness to try on both sides, that this work can be an effective, efficient way to support positive social impact by providing a means of wide public access to academic knowledge. This is especially important, I think, if we wish to see more accurate representations of pre-modern history, of medieval history, in the entertainment that we and ever-widening global audiences consume. And as I hope to have shown, a willingness to understand game development, tools and processes and perspectives, and to collaborate with industry to ensure that sound historical research and expert advice informs the development processes early is how we will eventually see more inclusive and more nuanced depictions of the global medieval past that certainly I want to see, and I think others want to see in their history-inspired games and entertainment. Thank you. And thank you. And I definitely invite you to visit the website and the social media for the digital lab if you're interested